Monolithic in steel, boring, bulky, ugly. Folks, these are just some of the words that have been used to describe the Rolex Explorer II. In fact, it might interest you to know that a whole segment of watch enthusiasts believe that the Rolex Explorer II is not worth being called a luxury item, especially since it offers a 20% premium compared to the 70% to 100% others bring. So, have you wondered why the Rolex Explorer II is the least favourite for many? Sit tight and enjoy the ride, folks, because we have much to say. Let's start at the beginning, shall we? The Explorer II was launched in 1971. That was 52 years ago. It was launched in 1971 and was met with the same lack of enthusiasm as those of other, more niche models in Rolex's sports line, such as the Milgauss and the Turnograph. Sales were slow because many people thought the watch was tacky and the dial was too much. While not technically rare as many watches in today's vintage market supposedly are, it is not as simple to locate in superb condition as, for example, a Submariner or GMT Master, which has become a highly sought-after timepiece. The fact that it had a 24-hour hand and a 24-hour bezel may have hurt sales. We're just saying. However, because of the immobility of the bezel, the GMT feature could not be used. It was a tool watch, though, so we'll have to do some serious exploring like real speleologists if we want to figure out what it's all about. Are you ready for some science? Cool. Since the late 19th century, speleology, in layman's terms the study of caves, has been recognized as a distinct scientific discipline in its own right, separate from geography and geology. Most of the actual investigation and research of cave structures has been done by potholers as a pastime. Therefore, they are often referred to as speleologists. This practice is also known as potholing or caving. Got it? Now, these cavers are not for the faint of heart. They must maneuver through tight areas and often spend days, weeks, or months underground. Especially if one has trouble keeping track of time, this might cause severe disorientation. That, folks, is what the Explorer II, with its fixed bezel and 24-hour hand, was made for. The watch allowed cave explorers like speleologists and potholers to keep track of time and know whether it was morning or evening, thanks to its enormous luminous 24-hour hand. Definitely a specialist application, but one that could come in handy for people who spend long periods of time indoors. It would be helpful for explorers on continents with long stretches of either day or night. Interestingly, the 1655 was powered by the same caliber 1575 GMT found in the 1675 GMT Master with 26 jewels. The caliber 1575 added a date function to the base caliber 1570 movement, and the caliber 1575 GMT added the extra 24-hour hand as a natural progression. With a hacking second feature, where the second hand stops when the winding crown is entirely taken out to alter the time, a 48-hour power reserve and automatic operation, this movement proved unbeatable. Yes, unbeatable. The watch's 39mm stainless steel case had crown guards and a non-rotating bezel marked with Arabic numerals on even hours and hash marks on odd hours to indicate that the movement inside was certified as a chronometer. Now, for a little bit of a digression. The antique Rolex collecting subculture fonds christening watches with unique monikers. At this time, the Paul Newman Daytona stands out as the most blatant case of a namesake. The Italians may have been the first to collect watches, and the terminology of collectors today is heavily influenced by Italian slang. The large 1950s bubbleback watches were called ovettoni, meaning big egg. The large reference 8171 moonphase watches were called padellone, meaning large frying pan, and the small star-marked pieces were called stellini, meaning little star. Freccioni, meaning large arrow, and Steve McQueen are two of the many names by which the 1655 Explorer II is known. The first comes from the watch's prominent 24-hour hand, and the second from reports that the famed actor frequently wore one. Although he was more commonly seen wearing the Rolex Submariner with a matte dial reference 5512, the 1655 has been given the nickname. We in some way like the Freccioni nickname. The dials, bezels, and second hands are the features that give these watches their character. As always, the devil is in the details. Let's begin with the dials, though. There were a total of 7 1655 dials made. 5 by Stern and 2 service replacements made by Baylor. The 2 service dials were made far later than the watch's production run, but they were stored so that the watches could be maintained for decades. Remember that Rolex didn't always make everything in-house. They used to contract out some of the fabrication of their components. As a result, there are discrepancies across batches of dials and bezels. We'll be concentrating on the main manufacturing run, not the service dials. Marks MK1 through 5 are also known as the MKs. All the dials had a huge triangle of 12, flanked by 6 and 9 squares. The remaining hours are indicated by markers that look like huge minutes, but are really located within the minute track. The outside rim of the dial features 24-hour marks that appear at random intervals and are spaced apart from the standard hour markers, making the dial appear busier than it actually is. Due to its striking appearance, which reminds some collectors of a disco floor from the 1970s with flashing square light panels, the dial is sometimes called the disco dial. The printed text on the dials serves to differentiate between the various marks. The dials of the MK2 and MK1 models are virtually identical. Collectors have dubbed this coronet style, which is somewhat spread and has thicker dots at the coronet's tips. Frogfoot, also seen on Rolex Explorer's reference 1016. The word perpetual is also spaced differently. It's narrower than the MK1, and the upper L aligns with the lower right stroke of the X in Rolex, whereas on the MK1, the A of perpetual is below the X. The MK2 also features the letters T Swiss T engraved into the case bottom to denote the dial's tritium illumination. Fascinating stuff, don't you think? Collectors of the MK3 model will immediately note the distinctive rail dial. Compared to the MK2, the MK1's coronet is noticeably wider, more clearly defined and symmetrical. On the outer bottom border, it still says T Swiss T. The hint to the MK3 is the wording Superlative Chronometer Officially Certified in the lower half of the dial. There is a glaring vertical separation